back. I'm back. Let's do this over again. I'm coming to y'all today with Are we in World War III? I don't know, but let's listen to what Trump said last night and to some stuff that was said this morning. Let's go.
To foreign intervention, to foreign bombing. In many senses, it can act as a rallying call for the nation to get behind the leader, in this case, this theocracy that has run Iran since the 1980s. And so we have to wait and see what the reaction is. They had threatened in blood-curdling language, and others, that there will be direct retaliation against American interests in the region, and we have to wait and see whether that was just rhetoric or whether that was a genuine threat that will be followed through on. We have to wait and see what the bomb damage assessment is. Is Israel going to be content to say, we've looked at the damage and we've degraded Iran's nuclear capability enough to be acceptable? And again, speaking to a senior military official just 2 days ago, he made it clear we never said we'd get rid of all of Iran's nuclear capability. We just said that we would degrade it so it was not an imminent threat.
Ian, panel, stand by for us. So we're going to go to Rachel Scott now, who's on the phone joining us from Washington, our senior political correspondent. Rachel, we are getting word that President Trump is going to speak tonight at 10 o'clock, about an hour and a half from now.
And this is from last night, by the way.
President Trump promised going into the election that he was not going to be the president of forever wars. He was going to end U.S. involvement in some of these wars overseas. Now here he is initiating this attack on Iran, a country of 90 million people, and big questions not only about what comes next, but divisions within his own party and support.
Absolutely, and we are already hearing from a number of lawmakers tonight, including Senator Lindsey Graham, who is a Republican senator on Capitol Hill, who had direct conversations with the president multiple times over the last several days, in which he urged President Trump to participate, to join Israel and strike Iran's nuclear sites directly. And we have heard from Senator Graham tonight already. He said that this was the right call, that the regime deserved it, saying, well done, President Trump. But there are plenty of Republicans who have clearly stated that they did not believe that the president should be getting involved. And for that primary reason, this is what the president ran on, being a peacemaker, pulling the United States away from ongoing conflict, not getting the United States even more involved in ongoing conflict. The president was asked directly about some of those words from Republicans, and he said, look, the bottom line here is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. He believes very strongly in that, but undoubtedly this is going to divide the party. And the question now is, do Republicans rally behind the president as he moves forward with this action, or do they speak out against it? We know a few did have a few warning signs leading up to it. We are learning tonight, as you said, when the president is expected to address the nation at 10 p.m. tonight. And as Ian clearly noted, it cannot really be understated here, just the immense pressure that the president was under from the Israelis. I was told he was under immense pressure from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself. The president, we know, was in very close contact with him. They stayed very close over the last few days. I'm told talking sometimes even multiple times a day. The president, a week ago, in a remarkable turn of events, said that this was possible, but that the U.S. at that point was not going to be involved. And we saw him leave the G7 summit to rush back to the White House. And that kicked off a series of meetings that the president was having with his national security team in the White House day after day, ultimately now leading up to this decision. We know the president was warming up to the idea, and tonight he announced it via Truth Social. And
I bought all of this stuff, and then I never did anything with it. I've always kind of had an artistic side, that's
the president was warming up to the idea, and tonight he announced it via Truth Social, and he will address the nation at 10 p.m. tonight Eastern.
Rachel Scott, thank you so much. Let's go to our Chief Washington correspondent, John Karl. John, you've actually been in touch with President Trump, speaking with him over the past couple of weeks about a variety of different issues. This idea of the president warming up to the concept, the possibility of striking Iran directly, do you have any sense of how quickly that developed and where it came from?
Well, he told us that he was going to make this decision at the last second. I don't think that was quite what happened here, but this came together incredibly quickly, and this is, without question, the most consequential decision Donald Trump has ever made. got into politics when he first became a presidential candidate, and he talked about ending forever wars. The question now is, did he just possibly take the first step towards ending what has effectively been a forever war, which is United States adversity with Iran, something that goes back to the hostage crisis of the seizing of our embassy in 1979. Iran has been a challenge for every American president since Jimmy Carter, in many ways overshadowing other initiatives, other efforts to get objectives in the Middle East. So did he effectively put an end to the Iranian threat, or was this the first salvo in yet another forever war in the Middle East? I reached out to a prominent Arab diplomat from a country that's allied with the United States with a simple question. I think this is the question that we should all be asking: what now? What next? And this diplomat said, honestly, no clue. The Iranians have a vote now. So what happens? We have 40,000 troops roughly in the Middle East. That's a force, and it's a force that can be used to protect American assets, to attack the Iranians, but it's also a target with. And the Iranians, their nuclear program may now effectively be gone, but the thousands of mid-range missiles it has, short-range missiles it has, can be used to target not just American troops and American assets in the region, but American allies. I don't know which way this is going to go, but I can tell you this has the feel of a decision that is far weightier than any Donald Trump has had to make in his time as a political figure in his time as president.
Yeah, and nobody starts a forever war thinking it's going to be a forever war. You look back in Iraq and Afghanistan, the intention was things were going to be wrapped up much, much quicker than what ended up happening. And here you have a country, 90 million people. We have already started to see some demonstrations in the streets in recent days against the United States, against Israel, and what all of this could mean going forward. The Ayatollah Khamenei, we're told that he was hunkering down in some undisclosed location, but had already named 3 potential successors. So what happens to him? How does Israel move forward? How do they go and verify what happened at some of these sites that were attacked? Let's go ahead and bring in our Matt Gutman, our chief national correspondent. Matt, you've spent a lot of time throughout this region. I know that you have a lot of sources in Israel and beyond. What are you hearing? What's the reaction you're getting tonight?
I think I just want to jump on the point that John Carl made just now, about how historical this moment is and how weighty it is for President Trump. Are we entering into a new forever war? We have to remember that Iran is the world champion of the forever war, waging a cloak and dagger war against the U.S. and Israel, the great Satan and the little Satan, for over 40 years now, right? They have had terrorist attacks behind the scenes. They have launched small-scale attacks. They have built armies around that Ian referred to earlier, that Shia Crescent, or the Ring of Fire, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, in Yemen, the Houthis, in Iraq, another group called Hezbollah.
God, it is hot.
They have effectively surrounded Israel over the past 4 years and created this.
I'll be right
Israel
back, y'all.
essentially dismantled it, but Iran is not going to let this go, and they are
Hello,
also
hello.
observers of history.
Welcome,
In
welcome.
1981, Israel
Like, share, subscribe. Like, share, subscribe. I'll be back in a minute.
destroyed Iraq's nuclear weapons program in Iraq, and there was no response. In 2007, Israel did the same thing in Syria, and there was effectively no response, destroying its nuclear capability. This is different. Iran is a nation of 90-plus million people, and they showed their incredible fortitude in the 1980s and 1988 war against Iraq. They lost 1 million people, and for the Imam then, the Khomeini, and Khamenei was the successor, making a ceasefire with Iraq and ending that war was called drinking from the poison chalice, and basically they're at that precipice again. Are they going to make a ceasefire, or will they continue fighting? At this point, I think it's understood, again, looking at recent history, when you give up your WMD, that is all you have. Gaddafi gave it up, and We saw how he was essentially butchered in the streets after he was captured. He was overthrown. So it seems, if history is an indicator, that the regime is going to try to hold on as long as possible. You mentioned Khamenei already has appointed 3 successors. I imagine they're going to go underground, and they're going to keep fighting in any way they can, lashing out at the United States and Israel with whatever capabilities they have left. And I think it would be very dangerous for anybody to underestimate the capabilities that Iran has at this moment. Even though they may be significantly degraded, they have been stockpiling them for many, many years. They are very, very potent and capable adversaries.
And Matt, thank you. And something else to watch here is the terror threat in the U.S. and around the world, and what this attack by the United States on Iran potentially does to that. Does it elevate here? I think that many would expect that it likely would, and we know that Iran has been a sponsor of terror all across not only the region but around the world. And we'll see how that plays out too. I do want to go back to the White House. I'm told our Selena Wang
Okay,
is there.
sorry, I'm
Selena,
back.
you were there earlier as the president arrived for this meeting with his national security advisors. What more are you learning about the discussions and what played out in those meetings?
Well, you and I were actually on the air together as that meeting with his national security team was underway, and the president, for days now, he's been speaking to a wide array of his advisors and allies. In fact, right now, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is here still at the White House, and the president has been weighing a variety of different factions. On the one hand, you have a group of Republicans, more traditional conservatives like Senator Lindsey Graham, who had been urging the president to take forceful, swift military action. Then on the other hand, you really had frustrated members of his MAGA base who were urging the president to hold back, arguing that any U.S. military intervention or action would damage the president's reputation and his campaign promise to end all forever wars. In fact, we had learned from sources that an ally like Steve Bannon, the MAGA podcaster, had actually been playing an outsized role despite the fact that he has no official government position, and that he had this week spoken on the phone with the president. He had also met the president for lunch. He was someone who was urging for restraint. And when it comes to the timeline here, the president was clearly putting positions in place in case he were to strike. We know that Americans had been evacuated out of Israel. The U.S. military also pre-positioning to defend U.S. interests in case Iran were to retaliate. But just days ago, President Trump said that he was going to give himself 2 weeks to make this decision. The thinking was that he was going to buy some time, hoping that the Iranians would come back to the table to negotiate. The Europeans had been also pressing for diplomacy, but the president also said that he wanted to make his decision at the, quote, last second before it was due. And so what we are seeing tonight is a decision that came together very quickly. But as John Carl mentioned earlier, this is potentially the most consequential decision the president has made, and the big question is what happens next. We know from sources that the president wants this to be wrapped up nicely, that he wants this to be contained, but the question is, to what degree did we degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities, and is Iran going to retaliate? President Trump, in his Truth Social post tonight, he wrote that, quote, "Now is the time for peace." The question is if he was able to achieve the 2 goals that he wanted, which was number 1, to both end Iran's nuclear program, and number 2, to also have this be a peaceful resolution, an end to the war.
Selena Wang for us, thank you. And just a reminder to our viewers here, President Trump is expected to speak in just over an hour at 10 p.m. later tonight from the White House. We'll bring those comments live as they happen. But I do want to bring in our ABC News contributor, former State Department official Steve Gagnier, and Steve, also an aviation expert as well, and a pilot. Steve, I'd like to ask you more about these B-2 bombers. That we were getting word that they were on the move, that there were also tanker aircraft that were following them. We thought they were going to Guam. Was this just one big diversion, or is there more to this?
Yeah, the real key to deception is a big part of war, and well played by the administration to be able to have everybody looking over towards Hawaii and towards Guam. That's where the B-2s are coming from. And maybe what we saw tonight were B-2s that actually flew all the way from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. So we also know that there were B-52s. Last open source intelligence showed that there were at least 4 on the ramp in Diego Garcia, the island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So the B-52s could have participated as well, because we know that there's a very benign air threat over Iran. So fly the B-2s. With the B-2 is the only aircraft that can carry what is called this massive ordnance penetrator, which is the only weapon that the United States or any country has that can get down to into the depths of where those centrifuge hulls are within the Fordo Mountain. So we know that this weapon, at least unclassified, can penetrate 200 feet. Fordo is a mountain. We don't know how deep some of those hulls were, maybe up to 300 feet, and so it might take several strikes. It may take several waves of B-2s over Fordo to make sure that all of those centrifuge hulls are taken out. So that's really interesting, the way that the administration did it, the way that the Pentagon did it. Look over here, look at the over here, and then come around the backside. There's also some tip-off here when we saw that the discussions that the Europeans had with the Iranians did not go well. The Iranians came out saying, well, we're willing to talk about it a little bit more. That must have infuriated Trump. Surely it infuriated the Israelis because it just showed that the Iranians are not interested in a diplomatic approach here. We also had one Iranian official say if it's a choice between giving up our enrichment capability and war, we pick war. And so it's been made very clear that the decision that the Iranians have taken. And so it was very interesting that the president called a meeting of his national security advisor within the White House tonight on a Saturday night. We also noticed he had 3 stops on the way coming back to the White House. And generally, this is a very talkative president, and we noted that he didn't take an opportunity to talk to press in any one of those 3. And so there were suspicions raised that something might be going on, even though he'd given us that 2-week window previously.
Yeah, we definitely took note of that when the president did not speak going into that meeting. Steve, just wanted to follow up, though. How do we now verify these 3 different nuclear sites and that the damage was done and that these materials were all destroyed?
That's a good question, Whit. Now there's very good overhead intelligence coming from space-based assets that will give us very accurate, very detailed looks from a God's eye view. And from that, they'll be able to determine how far, how deep the cratering went, and whether they think that it actually took out the site. But the real answer is, you can't know unless somebody gets on the ground. Now, considering how Mossad has been operating with impunity inside of Iran in an extraordinary way, maybe the Israelis have the ability to go in and to at least make sure that those bunkers in Fordo have been taken out. Remember when this also said that 3 sites were hit, 3 nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, and the nuclear development areas around Isfahan. So this is not just one strike. We'll see if the president believes that this will take more than 1 day, more than 1 pass. They'll do what's called a bomb damage assessment. They'll have all sorts of ways to do that with some very clever and highly technical capabilities. But to make that final determination whether this is it, whether this will actually take the nuclear program that the Iranians have been working on for decades and setting it back to a place where it cannot be reconstituted.
Steve Ganyard, always appreciate your insights. Want to go back to Ian Pannell in Tel Aviv. Ian, I understand you're getting some new information from sources there in Israel about how these B-2s carried out their attacks.
Wow, faking cold brew at home stinks. How long has this cold brew been stinking?
I don't know.
B-2s carried out their attacks.
Yeah, I mean, certainly confirmation from an official who says that they are not authorized to talk, confirming that US B-2 bombers were involved in this operation, which I think many of us had assumed anyway, especially the attack on Fordo. It's the most heavily fortified and best protected facility in Iran. It's literally dug into a mountain 60 miles southwest of Tehran. It was believed to contain close to 3,000 centrifuges. Remember, that's the equipment that you use to enrich uranium. And what matters with uranium enrichment is to what percentage it is enriched. And what the International Atomic Energy Agency had recently reported, really just a couple of weeks ago, was that it found that Iran's enrichment of uranium up to 60% was almost double what the previous assessment had said. Why does that matter? Well, it takes a relatively short period to get from 60% to 90%, and that is the crunch point at which you can potentially use it for a nuclear weapon. That's part of the reason that Israel has been going after Iran's ballistic missile capability, because once you produce the material material. It's a question of how you're going to deliver it. Now, we should restate and we should not forget that Iran has consistently insisted that its nuclear program is purely for peaceful civilian purposes. Israel certainly felt that while it didn't show evidence that Iran was trying to make a bomb, there had been some earlier suggestion a few years ago that was the case, but they would have the capacity to do so in a very short period of time. And by that point, it might be too late to act. Now, I think we're going to expect to hear from Israeli officials. One imagines that will take place after President Trump has spoken. It's 4 o'clock in the morning here, so people are just gathering the news at the moment.
I don't even see why we're there. We have no business putting ourselves in the middle of this mess.
Mentioned Mossad agents have been on the ground. They operated drone action on the ground. We know they've had personnel there. They've been cagey about some of their resources that they've used to carry out that initial lightning, shocking attack where they essentially decapitated the scientific and leadership of Iran, not the supreme leader, of course, but key decision makers, key military people, and key scientists who are all involved in Iran's nuclear program. So, certainly speaking, off the record, Israeli officials are very pleased with what they've done. They even intimated to me just a couple of days ago that they could almost declare this as victory at the moment, but they still wanted to feel that they had degraded Iran's capacity to produce uranium to a point where it no longer represented a clear and present danger. And that's certainly what these 3 operations are about. So we need to wait to hear from the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who presumably will wait until President Trump has spoken. We need to wait and hear from the Israeli Defense Forces about what exactly their role was. But I think the key question for all of us, as we get caught up in the minutiae of these kinds of operations, is what does it mean? Is this a one-off for the United States? President Trump's post on Truth Social would seem to indicate, because he refers to now let's have peace, that he hopes that is a one-off. That may well be wishful thinking, but we don't know. What will the reaction of the Iranian regime be? Will they have bombed them into submission? I think there are many voices in the region, people who know Iran, who will be highly skeptical that that will be the case. What will the reaction be against not just Israel, and everybody here is poised that the sirens will go off and there will be an incoming barrage, but what will the reaction be against US interests in the region? Diplomatic missions, US commercial interests, US civilians. There's a large-scale US military presence throughout Iraq. Now, Iraq has these popular mobilization units. These are the Iranian-sponsored militias who are instrumental fighting alongside Iraqi forces against ISIS. But many of them, like Katiba, Hezbollah, not part of Hezbollah in Lebanon, takes orders direct from Tehran. And I think particularly US forces in Iraq will be seen as potentially vulnerable. They will be on a state of high alert, preparing for some kind of response. I remember when General Soleimani, who was at that time the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command, was killed by the United States. We flew to Iraq at the time, and the response came. There was a massive barrage against US military bases throughout the region. So we have to wait and see. Hear from the president, but crucially, has this been enough, and what's the reaction going to be?
Yeah, panel, thank you. Let's go back to John Karl, our chief Washington correspondent, who's been following all of this too. And John, for President Trump, who promised to end forever wars and was going to get us out of the region, now he has initiated attacks, joining a war against Iran, one of our biggest and most feared adversaries. What does this mean for Trump and his presidency?
The argument you're hearing from Trump's supporters tonight is that what he did here was act to end a forever war. Iran has been a threat to the United States, a threat to our allies for almost a half a century. It's a nuclear threat, potentially existential threat to Israel and beyond. And what Trump has done here is acted to take out that threat. the Republican political spectrum so far, what you are hearing tonight is generally praise for Donald Trump, saying that he bravely acted and did what presidents before him wanted to, which was end the Iran nuclear threat. You're hearing the congressional leadership was briefed on this operation. Top congressional leaders on the Republican side have come out and praised Donald Trump. There's been very little from the Democrats yet. We've heard some, and we've heard a smattering of on the Republican side, where Tom Massey was very opposed to this effort.
It is hot, it is hot, it is hot.
Congress needed to authorize the war. So you're hearing some of that from Democrats. The Democrats have been amazingly quiet in this time since we, struck Iran. But the big question here is what we were talking about before, which is what happens next? Did this really eliminate the Iranian threat, or did it ignite a new threat from Iran? Iran has its nuclear program. We will see
It does.
in the days ahead, weeks ahead, maybe months ahead, whether this action has really taken out the nuclear threat. But Iran also has a vast arsenal of conventional ballistic missiles that can be used to target American allies. The next 48 hours are going to be crucial to see what happens with Iran. We heard from the foreign minister today of Iran say that if the United States gets involved, it's going to be very, very bad for everyone. A clear threat that the Iranians will respond. The Iranians have been under bombardment by the Israelis for 9-10 days, and their response was to hit Israel and hit Israeli targets. They have very clearly avoided a direct attack on American assets in the region. That's not going to change. We'll see how much did this degrade their ability to respond to attack American assets.
So not only is Israel a target, we're a target too.
Whether or not this is what President Trump's allies are saying right now, which is a brave, courageous effort that has finally taken on and eliminated the Iranian threat, or something that has created these.
Once these rings are gone, there will never be another Giacomo Moretti case. This is more than a sale. This is the end of a legacy. No shortcuts, no cheap metals, just timeless design, real craftsmanship, and meaning in every detail. These rings.
No, hold on, y'all. It is hot. Wherever y'all at, please stay cool.
Circumstances for a whole other phase in our conflict with Iran.
Yeah, as you noted, a bold and consequential decision that he made. If he is right, it is significant and will have an impact for years to come. If he's wrong, it could be very dangerous for Americans and people all across the region. We will have to wait and see how all of it plays out. Let's go ahead and bring in Jay O'Brien, our congressional correspondent on Capitol Hill. Speaking of some of that reaction, you're getting more of that tonight. Again, general praise from Republicans, but we know that there has been division within the party. What else are you hearing from the Hill?
Exactly right, Whit. You heard John mention, we've heard from top Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, the kinds of folks who would be briefed prior to an operation like this, saying that the White House was in touch with them before all this took place. John Thune briefed, according to multiple sources who spoke to her, Rachel Scott. Rick Crawford, the top Republican on the Intelligence Committee, saying the same. Speaker Mike Johnson, I'm told, was also briefed before this operation. He's just out moments ago with a statement, the Speaker. It's a lengthy statement, but he says, in part, quote, this is a, quote, reminder to our adversaries and allies that President Trump means what he says, going on to say that President Trump made it clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. But we're already starting to see some reaction, as John alluded to, from further right Republicans who say that this is the exact opposite, who say that President Trump campaigned on that slogan that he reiterated over and over again, no new wars. We've already seen Steve Bannon react to this. Steve Bannon meeting with the president just days ago. And then there was this curious post from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who made it clear over the last few days that she would oppose any kind of U.S. military action in Iran, typically a staunch ally of Donald Trump's on Capitol Hill. She posted, it seems like maybe 10, 20, 30 minutes before this operation was learned about in the general public, she posted that, quote, "This is not our fight." She goes on to say that peace is the answer with. So definitely some divisions on the further right of President Trump's party against this military action.
And Jay O'Brien for us in Washington, thank you. If you're just joining us right now at the top of the hour, we are coming on the air with this breaking news. President Trump ordering a strike on Iran. 3 separate locations using B-2 stealth bombers. These are 3 nuclear sites, including a full payload that he says at the primary site, Fordo. All planes are safely on their way home. That according to a social media post from President Trump. He's saying now is the time for peace. We have correspondents across the region and in Washington taking a look at all the details as they come in. But we know that earlier in the day, we were getting flight tracker radar information that those B-2 stealth bombers were on their way from the United States, we thought, to Guam. What we don't know is exactly what happened, if that was some sort of diversion or if there were planes that were moved to different places. We're getting more details on all of that as information comes in tonight. We're going to go back to Louis Martinez, who covers the Pentagon for us. He's been getting some of that information. Louis, I understand you have new info about how all of this played out tonight. What have you learned?
We have just learned from the U.S. official that yes, B-2 bombers did conduct a strike, on along with several dozen other aircraft. No other details are being provided right now, but at least we've solved for one of the mysteries, which is that yes, the B-2 bombers, not necessarily the ones that were in Guam, is the ones on that, but we do know now that B-2 bombers they conducted the strikes and then some of the 3 locations identified by President Trump and his Truth Social posting, and that several dozen other U.S. military aircraft were also involved in that strike.
And Louis, do we have any sense about what happens next now? We've talked about the verification process, about President Trump says that these attacks were successful, but do we know if there are troops in the region who may join Israeli troops to potentially go check out some of these sites and see what damage was done?
Well, one of the things that is always going to take place with bomb damage assessment, the term that we use at the Pentagon is PDA. And sometimes it can happen pretty quickly because you have drone aircraft, you have other aircraft that have surveillance capability that are monitoring the area that there's going to be elite bombers who are carrying out and dropping ammunition. So in this case, there may have been some aircraft that had eyes on, if you will, that were monitoring that, and that feed is more than likely going to be analyzed to see how successful the strike was. In some cases, the PDA can take hours, in other cases, it can take days. So it remains to be seen exactly what we're going to see here. But in terms of this particular strike that was carried out by U.S. bombers, knowing that there were several dozen other aircraft, we can kind of imagine what the roles of those aircraft were. Potentially, they were providing security, so in case there was something along the lines of other aircraft that Iran has a very capable Air Force. We're not even sure that some of their aircraft has been gotten off and run out over the last week as hostilities have taken place between Israel and Iran. We know that it is a very integrated air defense environment for the Iranians, which means that the Israelis had air superiority. Remember that mention from President Trump earlier in the week. He said we have air superiority, and of course at the time we raised question because the United States has not been involved over Iran, but he has seen the Israelis being the only one carrying out air operations inside of Iran. And the way they were doing that is because over the last year, there were 2 airstrikes carried out inside of Iran, and mainly the one in the last October severely degraded the strategic air defense system, which meant that the Israeli aircraft could come in at a distance and fire their standoff weapons, and with those strategic air take Iran with its two bombers.
Louis Martinez, thank you so much. I want to go back to Steve Ganyard, our ABC News contributor, former State Department official. Steve, I know that you've been reporting on the buildup of American forces in the region. It's really quite unprecedented what we're seeing.
Yeah, it is. It's extraordinary movement. We will soon have, when Ford leaves Norfolk and gets to the region in probably about a week or 10 days, we'll have 3 aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf region. That has not happened since 2003. So there's an unprecedented amount of naval air power and naval power in the region, to include those ships that we've seen offshore of Israel that are participating in the defense of Israel with the missiles that are able to knock down incoming ballistic missiles. On the Air Force side, there have been hundreds of airplanes deployed not only to the region but to Europe. There are tankers packed up all over Europe. In just about every NATO country has lots of U.S. tankers that will provide an option to the president. So clearly, the strikes that went on tonight were probably enough. Maybe they'll have to go back and reattack one more time, but it's probably enough to take out all of the nuclear sites that the Israelis hadn't touched yet. But the amount of firepower, the amount of combat capability and capacity that the president has built up in the region is far more than would be needed just to take out the nuclear facilities. So perhaps this is part of the deception and the mind games that he wants the Iranians to know, that if the U.S. decides to go back in, if the Iranians do something to go after U.S. troops in the region, we have to be concerned about sleeper cells in the United States. If there is something that comes back in the U.S., then that's going to be a problem for Iran. And the U.S. certainly has the amount and the capacity of military power that would be used to go back at Iran and to finish the job.
Steve, the Iranians have said that you could destroy our nuclear facilities, but you can't destroy our knowledge, the information that we've built up over decades on this. Is that what kind of threat is that? I mean, if the facilities are gone, how quickly could they potentially rebuild the material to make a bomb?
Well, with the facilities gone, it's going to take a long time, because the centrifuges are really what we need is, as Ian was talking about before, that most of the enrichment is about the 60%, but it's only about another 5% of effort to get up to 90. So the centrifuges are key. To your point, though, the human knowledge, the intellectual property that they have developed over the years to be able to think about how to develop a nuclear program is key. So what do the Israelis do? In the first few minutes of this opening, a salvo here against Iran, they borrowed from the Hezbollah playbook, and they took out many, if not of the top 10, top 15 nuclear scientists that are working on the nuclear enterprise within Iran. So they took out the people who knew and had the knowledge, and so that, they hope, will be enough to prevent the nuclear program from being recapitalized. One additional point here. So we have to figure out where the enriched fuel is and who can get to that. So that will be part of any post-war deal where you can see IAEA, some independent body that's going to want to get in and secure the previously enriched uranium to make sure that the Iranians cannot use that to reconstitute their program or to build a nuclear weapon.
And Steve, a follow-up to this, because I think a lot of Americans at home right now are wondering, what this means for us and our safety around the world. I know the region has changed so much in recent years. You mentioned proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. Who could potentially come to Iran's defense as an ally? What does Russia do? What does China do? How should Americans be looking at this?
Yeah, you'll notice that both Russia and China said, hey, yeah, nice, we like your drones and we like your oil, but we're not getting involved. So right now, Iran is totally isolated, and not only are they isolated, but they have no defenses. And not only is Assad operating on the ground with impunity, but the Israeli Air Force is flying over the skies of Iran unimpeded. So they have no friends, they have no allies, they have nobody that's going to come to their aid. So this sets up some concern about revenge attacks. If you'll notice, I believe it's been more than 24 hours since a ballistic missile has been launched from Iran towards Israel. That is because the Israelis have been working very hard to knock down all the launchers, to go to the facilities where they store these ballistic missiles, and so we see this decrease. And they're shooting drones, but drones are not as effective. They take a long time to get to Israel. So a very effective 8 or 9 days where the Israelis have taken down that ballistic missile capability. As that goes along, and as the Iranians continue to be
pummeled, and while the Iranian or the Israelis piece by piece take apart their military, their IRGC, their internal security apparatus, this is going to eventually get to a point where the regime will be weakened and something will happen. What will happen? We don't know. Is something better going to take the place of the regime, or is it something worse? This is always the risk in war, not knowing what the branches and sequels and outcomes will really be.
All right, this feels almost illegal to know, but our windows were so old and just desperately needed to be replaced. So I called a few contractors, but they all quoted me a hefty $10,000 or more for new windows, and I almost lost it. That's when my friend, who's a real
And sequels and outcomes will really be.
In a country of 90 million people. Steve Kanier, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I want to go to Aaron Katersky, our chief investigative correspondent. And Aaron, I want to ask you more just about the domestic threats. We know in the U.S. we'd already been operating in a high threat, high alert environment. Some of those threats, domestic homegrown, political terrorism that we've seen. But now, how does this change the calculation? How might law enforcement agencies across the country respond to these attacks?
They're already responding with, as we speak, the NYPD in New York is responding to cultural, religious, and diplomatic sites associated with Israel and Iran. This is out of an abundance of caution. They say there is no specific threat, but they want to make sure there's a deterrent presence at these locations because the U.S. has to be considered, the U.S. homeland now has to be considered a target of Iran. And although, as you've been discussing with Iran, is highly degraded from Israeli attacks now from the U.S. The U.S. is now a player and is a belligerent actor in the eyes of Iran. So the U.S. homeland has to be considered a target both from proxy groups that Iran can dispatch and has already shown some adeptness in attacking U.S. interests both here and abroad, but also through cyber attacks. And there's law enforcement officials have been told to expect heightened cyber threats from Iran. And remember when the Iranians have already targeted President Trump personally, holding him responsible for the General Soleimani attack, and they've sought revenge ever since.
Always the threat of a lone wolf attack, too. And that's always a major concern for law enforcement. Somebody who's maybe not directly getting any guidance from Iran or Iranian proxies, but inspired by what's happened in that country. Aaron Katersky for us, thank you. Let's go back to Rachel Scott in Washington. Rachel, I understand that we're learning President Trump or the White House gave some heads up to Israel before these strikes.
Exactly what I just spoke to a senior administration official who told me that the United States did in fact give Israel a heads up ahead of these strikes. That senior administration official also telling me that the president spoke directly with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after the U.S. carried out these strikes. That is according to a senior administration official at the White House. We talked about the pressure that Israel put on the Trump administration and directly on the president. We know that Netanyahu and the president have been very close. I was told that at one point they were speaking maybe even multiple times a day, and that a source told me that the president received direct pressure from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the U.S. to get more involved. It was an option that the president at first was keeping an arm's length distance to, and then increasingly he started to warm up to this idea, asking in the Situation Room about these options, about whether or not the United States can successfully carry out this attack. The president tonight saying that ultimately this was successful, but as he's been in close contact with the Israeli Prime Minister, he did speak to him yet again after these strikes.
Rachel Scott for us, thank you. Let's go back to John Karl. John, I understand you had a conversation with a very good source in all of this, President Trump himself. What is he saying to you?
Yeah, I just got off the phone with him, short conversation. The bottom line from him was, in his words, this was a tremendous success tonight. When I, engaged with him on questions of how, how this was undertaken and what the next steps are, he did not want to engage on that right now. He obviously is addressing the country in less than an hour, but he did pick up the phone to tout what he called a tremendous success tonight. Separately with a conversation with another good source, not President Trump, who said that there was on destroying as much of that as possible as well, not simply the nuclear sites, but also targeting Iran's ability to respond to what happened tonight.
And John, as you know, all presidents come into office with plans for the homeland, their domestic agenda, and all the things that they want to do. And Trump himself very vocal about ending foreign wars and not wanting to engage in long, extended conflicts. This, no doubt, I mean, can you even compare this to a decision he made in his first term? Is this the biggest, most consequential decision he's ever made?
I'm just going to cut off
President of the
right
United
here.
States?